Hello everyone, this is Isidore, and in this video I'm going to talk about the spells in the Lore of Ruin. This is one of the two lores available to the Skaven, and the Lore of Ruin is the one best suited if you want your spellcaster to function as a living artillery piece. With a myriad of damaging spells and a bit of utility thrown in for good measure, this lore is all about killing your enemies as fast as possible. To start, its special passive effect, Musk of Fear, is more of a defensive debuff than an effect that aids in aggression. Every time a spellcaster that has purchased this ability casts a spell, it debuffs all enemy units on the map, reducing their leadership by 4 and their melee attack by 13 for 8 seconds. If you notice that it specifically reduces melee attack by the number 13, then good job, you're paying attention. The effect doesn't last very long, but considering that it's quite powerful as a free add-on on all your spells, it's very useful. The best way to make use of this effect is to not cast spells until your units have engaged the enemy in close combat, and then space out your spell casting by at least 8 seconds per spell to make the most out of every spell you cast. This ability is an absolute bargain, and I highly recommend purchasing it if you take a spellcaster that uses the Lore of Ruin. The first spell in the Lore of Ruin is Warp Lightning, which costs 5 power points. This is a bombardment spell, meaning that it strikes a target from above, which immediately puts it above many other damage spells, simply because this means you can cast it on enemies who are on top of walls. For all you lovers of siege battles, Warp Lightning is an absolute gem. Upon casting this spell, it makes a very noticeable buzz, then green lightning gathers over the target area. This means you should never cast this spell on unengaged enemies, as it gives your enemy plenty of warning before it strikes. After the delay, it launches several bolts at the target location, which explode for pretty good magical armor-piercing damage. This spell is best suited for targeting densely packed infantry formations, and is less well suited for targeting units with a lot of health per soldier, like monsters or lords. However, it should be immediately stated that for a spell of its cost, Warp Lightning is almost ridiculously powerful. It can easily punch holes in infantry units, even elite infantry, which makes it invaluable for sniping those high-value units like temple guards or executioners. Don't doubt for a second that there will be a lot of Skaven generals out there that will have a spellcaster using the Lore of Ruin purely to combine Warp Lightning with Musk of Fear, thus repeatedly applying damage and a small debuff to the enemy every so often. Warp Lightning can also be overcast, which doubles its cost, as well as the number of bolts fired, by launching a second volley a second after the first volley has concluded. As per usual, this also gives a 50% miscast chance. While this seems like an excellent trade-off as the spell deals immense amounts of damage per volley, the biggest issue I've had with overcasting this spell is that the first volley of bolts, provided they spread evenly within the target area, which admittedly is not guaranteed, will typically blast all infantry in the area of effect out of the way, leaving only a handful of units to be stricken by the second volley. In short, overcasting this spell is hard to justify, unless you absolutely need everything in the area of effect to die right there and then, and you're not willing to risk the bolts of lightning missing your target, or striking in too small of an area. Howling Warpgale would be a decent spell for any other army, but for the Skaven it can play a vital role filling one of the gaps in the army's roster. It's an area of effect hex that almost instantly immobilizes all flying units caught in the area of effect for 19 seconds. This is perfect for the Skaven, since they lack flying units themselves and thus have no way to intercept enemy flyers, a gap which this spell fills nicely. Simply cast the spell on enemy flyers, then focus your ranged weapons on them to bring them down before they can crash into your lines. As said flying units will not be able to move and many flying units are large units, this combines extremely well with a squad of globadiers who can decimate most flying units before the hex wears off. When overcast, the spell's duration doubles and its cost increases to 10, which makes it perfect for dealing with especially durable flying units, like dragons, terrorgeists or Pegasus Knights. Death Frenzy is an aggressive buff that costs 6 power points designed to vastly increase the lethality of your melee units. It gives a big buff to your unit's melee attack and weapon damage, while also making them immune to psychology. This makes it perfect for casting it on a unit of flanking plague monks right before they impact with the enemy line, or on your storm vermin with halberds, as they're fighting a large monster like a carnosaur, so they'll take it down faster and won't be forced to rout due to fear and terror. This spell is best suited for units that are about to charge, and preferably units that already have high weapon damage, to get the most out of the weapon damage buff. Another great part of the spell is that it's fairly cheap, so don't be afraid to cast it wherever you need more killing to be done. When overcast, the spell becomes an area of effect buff instead, perfect to enhance your entire front line at the moment of impact, though it does double the cost of the spell. Just remember that it works best on units that already do quite a bit of damage, so generally I wouldn't bother casting it on a swarm of Skaven slaves. Scorch is a much larger area of effect spell than Warp Lightning. It costs 8 points and affects a large teardrop-shaped area of effect, dealing a bunch of magical fire damage to all units hit. It's a good spell for damaging a large infantry blob. If the enemy has his whole front line packed together against yours, casting this in such a way that it hits most of his units can cause a lot of devastation. However, this spell deals poor armor-piercing damage, so be warned that this spell is not that effective against units with heavy armor. It's best used to decimate large volumes of light infantry, preferably when said infantry has been lined up. Don't worry about your target trying to run out of the way, since this spell typically strikes too fast for enemy units to be able to dodge it. When overcast, Scorch gets a small price hike, costing 11 power points, in return for significantly increased cast range. This is honestly not worth it in most situations, simply because you're not getting any extra damage for the extra cost and miscast chance. Of course, you may one day end up in a pinch where your caster is too far away from the battle to cast this spell normally. In that case, keep this overcast effect in mind, but don't expect to use it much in most battles. In the hands of a clever general, I can scarcely imagine a spell more dangerous than Skitterleap. Skitterleap gives the target unit an extremely long-lasting buff that gives that unit a bunch of bonus movement speed and an enhanced version of the Stalk ability, which means that they are invisible to the enemy until the enemy gets very close to them, at a cost of 9 power points. While the spell gives no combat bonuses to the unit, the ability to quite rapidly sneak a unit behind enemy lines is potentially devastating. A unit of rat ogres coming out of nowhere can do a lot of damage if the enemy is not prepared to receive them. The biggest weakness of this spell, of course, is the cost. 9 power points is a no small investment for a spell that doesn't give your units a buff to their combat ability. Even so, this spell has immense tactical possibilities, limited only by your creativity. When overcast, the spell costs 14 power points, making it exceptionally pricey, but its duration effectively doubles, ensuring that your target unit has plenty of time to get into position and strike. Crack's Call is a very large, very expensive area of effect spell that costs 15 power points to strike all enemies in a large, wide line for a large amount of magical armor piercing damage. If you find your Skaven tangled up with a bunch of Blackguard or White Lions, this is the spell you cast to absolutely destroy the enemy's entire battle line in one fell swoop. The spell has very little warning, and while it sucks against single targets with a lot of health, you can be damn sure it'll severely damage any infantry unit caught in the blast zone, regardless of how armored they are. Feel free to cackle madly as you hit a battle line of Chaos Warriors with this spell, and take out just about half the health of every squad hit. If for some reason the damage isn't quite to your liking, you can also overcast this spell. This ups the cost to 20 power points while increasing the already impressive damage even further. This is a great way you'll absolutely destroy everything hit by Cracked Skull, but it'll also drain you of most of your power points in one go, so keep that in mind. Lastly, there's also a single character-specific spell for the Lore of Ruin, which replaces Skitterleap on Grey Seers. This is the rightfully feared, almost legendary, dreaded 13th spell. This is by far one of the most powerful spells in the game, and for good reason. While it costs an unbelievable 25 power points, it has two powerful effects. First, it creates a fairly large explosion at the target location, which, pay close attention, is right behind where the summoned unit will spawn, which will severely damage any unit caught in the blast, and then send several random bolts of magic falling to the ground nearby to deal small amounts of extra damage. Then a unit of storm vermin with halberds will crawl out of the ground at the site of the explosion, form up, and then be ready for combat. Not only is the explosion powerful enough to almost single-handedly rout 2 units of Empire Swordmen caught in the blast, but the resultant squad of Storm Vermin is an exceptionally powerful summon that will proceed to do even more damage over its lifespan. Properly applied, this spell can single-handedly change the outcome of battles, first dealing heavy damage to whatever squad you aim it at, and then spawning a powerful squad of infantry to do your bidding. The drawbacks, however, are obvious. You can only use this spell twice before it's out of charges, and with its enormous cost in power points, it's very likely you'll be pretty much out of power points by the time you've cast it twice. If you're going to use this spell, don't expect to do much spell casting beyond that. The Storm Vermin squad, while very powerful compared to many other summoned units, is not unbreakable and degrades over time. A smart opponent will either bog down the unit of Storm Vermin with cheap chaff to force it to waste its time and vigor until the unit degrades entirely, or surround it and break its morale with elite units, and then damage it until the squad will no longer pose a threat. That's all for the Lore of Ruin. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and remember, the best general is not the one with the most tools, but the one who makes the most of the tools he has. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel.